Alright, hi everyone. Mr. Massey here to do a little lesson for you on tomato plants and tomato pruning specifically today. So we're going to get up close and personal with the tomato plant, learn a little bit about the different parts of the tomato plant, and then how to properly take care of it in a hydroponic greenhouse. So you can see we have a whole double row of tomatoes here, and we'll just kind of start at the bottom of the plant and work our way up. Obviously the lowest portion here of the plants are the roots, and right now if I pull this back you see there's already a ton of roots for the plant that have almost started filling this whole bag up. And as we water every hour basically right now, we're giving those roots, the water flows through these tubes as we described in a previous video and into the bag, and then it's the roots take it up. Okay, so this is called a rock wool block, and that is what the seeds were originally placed into. It's basically like kind of like styrofoam almost, or fiberglass is what it's made of. And the plants are in there. Now if you look right at the bottom here, there's a little brown line. Can you zoom in and see that little brown line? And that's because these tomato plants were grafted. The bottom part from here down is a variety of tomato plant that is very hardy and disease resistant, not necessarily very good tasting tomato. And then they graft a top part of the tomato plant on. That's the variety you want to eat. So it's called the variety, and this is called the rootstock down here. So they graft two pieces together, and you get hardy, disease-resistant plants that are also the taste you want. So let's work our way up. You can see the first couple leaves are very small, and then you start getting a leaf, every 5 to 10 centimeters. Here's a big leaf coming off there. Here's the next one here. Here's the next one here. And so we end up basically with, say, 1, 2, 3, 4 true leaves, and then we get what we call our first truss of tomatoes. So this is a grape tomato, so it produces a lot of flowers on one truss like this. You see these ones are already developing into some nice sized grape tomatoes. They're not going to get much bigger than that, and they'll start turning red. And then basically what's going to happen after that is you're going to count every 3 leaves, you should get another truss. So I'm going to count here, 1, 2, 3, and here is our next truss right here. Then I count again, 1, 2, 3, and here's another truss again. I could keep going, 1, 2, 3, and there's a little baby truss of flowers. The flowers aren't open yet, but that's where the next will be. So it's a very patterned sort of system. So let's have a look at a leaf. The leaf is this whole section here, and you see there's a whole bunch of leaflets coming off of one big long leaf here. And of course that's where the plant does most of its photosynthesis and gaining energy from the sun and producing its sugars, which of course are part of what go into the tomato fruit to make it taste really good. So when we prune the plant, we're going to start at the bottom, and every time we find a leaf, there's potential for a side shoot to form that we call a sucker. So most of them have been taken off, but I always want to go right at the bottom of the plant and check every leaf and see if there's a sucker. I don't see any until I get to this leaf right here. So this leaf, we follow the stem up, here's the stem, and this leaf has actually a very big side shoot we got to take off. So if we look here, this is the trajectory of the actual stem, here's the leaf, and right in here, between there, is called a sucker, or side shoot. I'm going to take that off. We don't want that growing, so I basically break it, and here it is. Let's have a look at this. Now you'll notice that the pattern on the sucker matches the tomato plant, because you've got leaf, 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 and then look right in here, there are another set of flowers. This would actually be kind of like a brand new plant. In fact, even the leaves on the sucker have their own suckers. And if I let this sucker grow, its leaves would get suckers. So that would very quickly create a very vegetative plant where it's mostly leaves, not a lot of tomatoes. And of course, I want to grow tomatoes, not tomato leaves. I can't really eat these. So we put these in our compost bin, around there somewhere. I'll pick that up, I promise. And then we continue on up the plant. So I gotta find my next leaf. So here's the next leaf, and you should be able to see in between here, oops, this little sucker growing right in here. This is the small one that comes off. Don't break this one off. Some people are like, oh, that looks like a sucker. No, that's our actual tomatoes. Don't break them off. We keep on going up. Here's the next leaf here. Here's the stem. So right in between is the sucker. So it's kind of a pattern, right? And sometimes you get to a place like this and you're like, well, which one is the stem? Is it that one or that one or that one? Well, first of all, the main stem should be thicker. So you can tell that way. Second of all, you'll notice that this stem has flowers already open on it. whereas this one doesn't. So this is gonna be my sucker. And the other thing you'll notice is that the leaf here and the stem almost always make a 90-degree angle. So right there, that's like a square, right? And every single one is pretty close to square like that. Whereas the suckers are more angled, right? So moving on up, this sucker's just starting. I can't really even see it. Here's another truss. And I'm pretty much done pruning now, because once I get near the top of the plant, I want to be really careful, because if I ever accidentally broke off the top of this plant would have a lot more trouble growing up the string from then on, because I've kind of like cut it at that height permanently. Unless I let a sucker grow, but they're never as strong, it's never as good. So now the only problem I have remaining is that this plant, if I just let it go, you can see it's kind of falling over, and eventually it would just lie on the floor over there, which I don't want. So now I've got to train it up the string. Now I got two ways to train it. I've got one, which is just to wind up the string. And so I very carefully take this and I just give it a couple of wraps, and that's all I'm going to need to do in this plant, okay? Because now it's actually following up the string nicely. The other method I have is sometimes you feel like you have to bend the stem too much and you don't want to risk breaking it. You can use a tomato clip. And I've got a tomato clip right down here. You can see one. And it's right here. And you see the string actually attaches right to the clip, which then goes around the plant. And I can add more clips as I need them up the plant just to support it more. In fact, I think I probably will do that when I get another clip. I'm going to add one maybe right here, and that way it'll just be one more support for the plant in case that one ever breaks or something, the whole plant doesn't come tumbling down. Now eventually, as you follow this up, this will continue to grow all the way up to that wire. And when it does that, the very top wire, I can't pick it anymore, it's too high, plus there's no string beyond that to support it. I can unwind that string and I'm going to lower the whole plant down so that I can reach the plants again and there's more string available for it to grow upwards. Okay, so let's just go over one more time the pruning method we talked about. Again, we start at the bottom, and one of the most common places I see people miss suckers is the very bottom, because they kind of just say, most of the prunes usually near the top of the plant, but once in a while, you look right down here, we actually have a whole bunch of action. As soon as you see all this weird stuff going on here, you can say it's probably a sucker. So sure enough, right here, right near the bottom of the plant, a sucker decided to grow. Right there, a big one. And that's basically, if I leave that, it's taking a lot of the nutrients I give to the plant and putting it into this growth, which I don't want. So now I'm gonna kind of go up and follow each leaf, looking for suckers, make sure I don't miss any. And eventually I can see these are a different kind of tomato. If you look carefully here, you can see they're gonna grow a lot bigger than the other ones. We'll talk about that in a second. Carrying on, there's a little baby sucker right in here. And then we get to here. So here's the next one. Here's the leaf, there's the stem. And I break that off. The next leaf also has a sucker. You can see it pretty clearly here. There's the stem, there's the leaf. Just breaks off. And this one doesn't have one yet. And I'd say I don't want to go much farther than that. So again, remember the next step would be to wrap it. So the thing I want to make sure I don't do, if I wrap it, I don't want to put the wrap right on this flower, because if I do that, it'll pinch off the truss and the nutrients can't get to the tomato. So I can go right below it, but I'm going to go above it. I want to risk hitting it, and I'm going to carefully move that leaf out of the way. You notice I don't wrap it a million times. It's just like a very sort of slow wrap, and I always try to wrap the string clockwise around the plant when I look above, just to keep the pattern. Okay, let's look at the bottom of the plant. One important thing is to try to keep airflow through there, and these bottom leaves, once they turn this kind of yellow color and they kind of turn upside down, they're not really doing any good. And so I'll actually remove the leaves. I've got a special curved pruner, and it's curved because that way I can keep the tip away from the part of the plant I don't want to cut, so it actually guards it. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to remove that bottom leaf. I'm going to remove this bottom leaf, and because the plants are still pretty young, I'm only going to remove these 3 leaves right now. You want to make sure you always leave about 1 meter of good leafy growth on every plant. As it grows taller, I'll continue to remove 2 or 3 leaves at a time every week or 2, okay? So we'll then talk about the actual tomatoes that are growing. So this, as you can see, it's not like the one we looked at a minute ago. I'll move this so you can kind of hopefully see. This one is only growing 1, 2, 3, 4 tomatoes. Now, believe it or not, I don't want 4 tomatoes. I only want 2 tomatoes. So I'm gonna take my clippers, I'm gonna clip off these smaller flowers here and here. And basically, a couple of reasons I want that. This variety is called a beefsteak tomato. It's like what you cut for your hamburgers. So it's a big diameter of a tomato. They're gonna grow big, and if I leave all 4 on, one thing that might happen is they might weigh the truss down and actually break it off. That's one thing that might happen. The other thing that might happen is because the truss has to distribute nutrients to all 4 flowers, which become tomatoes, they might all be a little bit smaller than I want. And I actually, with this variety, I want a really nice big tomato so that the thick slab of tomato fits right on my burger patty, right? And so I want only 2 tomatoes here. In fact, if I can, as I move up, remember, I should be able to go up 1, 2, 3, and I should find a truss right here, and sure enough, here it is. This one is actually going to try to grow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tomatoes. And again, I don't want 5, I only want 2, so that they're more even growth and they're bigger. Before I do that, I want to show you, let's look at the flower really carefully. And one thing that, of course, tomato plants need if they're going to grow tomatoes is pollination. A couple ways pollination can happen. We all know, of course, that bees or other pollinating insects and birds can fly around, and they can, you know, stick their legs in there and then fly to another plant and transfer pollen from one to another, and that pollination has to happen or you won't get a fruit. However, in a greenhouse like this, I can't really bring in bees, so all I have to really come along and do is come along and I go like this. I tap it like that, and pollen, invisible to our eyes, flies through the air, and there's so much pollen. How many pollen? Millions of pollen, that certainly some will fall in the other flowers. Not millions? Millions. It's the best pollen I've ever seen. We have the best pollen in the world ever. I guarantee we have the best pollen. Anyway, so what I'm gonna do though, of course, is I don't want 5 flowers, I want 2, so I'm gonna cut off the outer 3, and that truss is now ready, right? So I'm gonna have less flowers. So I've showed you a grape tomato. We just looked at a beefsteak tomato, and this is one we call a cocktail tomato, and it grows about the size of a golf ball when you harvest it. So once again, you look at this and you'll see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 flowers on this one truss. If I let all of them grow, it wouldn't be the end of the world. The ones in the end would be a little smaller, these ones would be a little bit bigger, and that's okay because for our purposes, we're basically harvesting them, taking them home and eating them ourselves. But if I was in a commercial greenhouse that I was growing them to put in on the shelves, well, then you gotta think about the packaging, and you gotta think of what customers are gonna think when they come, they see some big ones and some small ones. There's a lot of marketing involved in these kind of sales. So what you have to think about now is trying to get all the tomatoes the exact same size for packaging and shelving and that sort of thing. So what they'll do here, just like with the beefsteak, is we'll do what's called a truss prune. Again, the truss is the piece that all the tomatoes grow on, this vine that the tomatoes grow on, and for this size, I usually keep about 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and sometimes I feel sorry for this one because it's already growing, so I keep 9. And I've got 9, these ones aren't gonna grow, but the energy goes into the other ones, and they'll be roughly uniform size. Generally speaking, the larger the tomato is gonna grow, the fewer you leave on the truss. So that's why for the beefsteak, we left 2, maybe 3. For the cocktail tomato, we might leave 8 or 9. For the grape tomatoes, we can leave many more. We might leave 12 to 15, even though it might try to grow 20 or more, right? So it's really not, depending on what greenhouse, they might all have different slight standards, and depending on what the supermarkets want, right? If the supermarkets say, I want this many tomatoes on the vine of this kind, then the greenhouse would adjust their pruning methods to suit that customer, right? And so that's a little bit more about how that all works. In a future video, we'll show you how we harvest the tomatoes and how we package them and send them out to eat.